Actually, my family have not stopped being harassed. The harassment has been continuous for years. So after I left China, it was reduced for a while, but starting from April this year, a mad retaliation began again. On the 18th of April, they started to throw stones, dead chickens and ducks, beer bottle bombs at my home. During the night, they dug up a small tree grown by my family, and they dug up vegetables grown by my mother, who is 80 years old. It's worth mentioning that this persecution is happening in a systematic way.
What were the promises that were made by the Chinese authorities at the time? Because some people might say it was very predictable that there would be a backlash against your family because of your decision.
At the time, the central government said very clearly and promised me and the US negotiators that they acknowledged that I had been treated unlawfully for years, that my human rights were abused and my family was ill-treated. They promised that they would punish those Shandong officials who had violated the law and that they would do a thorough and open investigation. They promised that they would protect the civil rights and safety of my family and relatives. But up until now, they have not carried out any of this.
So all of this has changed the trust that you did have for the central government at the time you left. You believed their promises that they would punish the local officials.
I still remember when I answered that question at the time, I said that this will be a chance for us to see whether the Chinese Communist Party has credibility or not. What I meant then was that the Chinese Communist Party could show the entire world whether it has credibility by how it acts. Now the Chinese Communist Party has shown us that it is not credible at all.
So how does that make you feel then about the Chinese leadership? And obviously there's been a leadership change in China since you left, because there is this idea in China that it might be local officials who are corrupt, but the central government can fix things if it intervenes. Is that not your belief?
I think this is an illusion. Whenever there is a leadership change in China, people have a lot of hope, but that hope is never met. This is what happened with former President Hu and former Prime Minister Wen. But under their 10 years rule, they dragged China back to Cultural Revolution era. The Chinese Communist Party has become fascistic and hooligan-like. They totally ignore the stipulations of the law. They do whatever they like.
So what would you call upon the Chinese government to do now in terms of your case and the case of your family?
The Chinese government is just a puppet of the Chinese Communist Party. They have a lot of privileges without responsibility. The attacks on my family is actually an attack on Xi Jinping and the Communist Party itself. Now the Chinese people have woken up to civil rights, and so I advise the Chinese Communist Party to return to its position to be a party instead of kidnapping the state and the government.
And how do you feel overall about the relationships between the Chinese government and Western governments like the US and Britain, who you're lobbying at the moment? Do you think that somewhere in their talks with China they're forgetting human rights?
The West hasn't forgotten human rights issues, but they are putting human rights and universal values in a very unimportant position. Business interests have replaced issues of human values. Although business relations are important, we realize that the Chinese Communist Party is kidnapping the West using business contracts and preventing them from speaking openly about human rights. I remember Churchill once said, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." I think the West should not forget this. In the past, the fascists were very powerful, but should we become their partners because they had power?